It's in a lawsuit filed by a former deputy for the Waupaca County Sheriff's Department are asking the Seventh Circuit Court of Appeals to get involved in a federal lawsuit. They want the appeals court to decide whether the lawsuit should be thrown out. This is an update now on a story in Action 2 News has been following for the last 3 years. The now former Detective Sergeant Peter Krager testified in 2022 about concerns over altered arrest reports. A judge determined there was a Brady violation with the Waupaca County Sheriff's Department, which means a failure to disclose evidence that could change the outcome of a criminal case. Krager filed a federal lawsuit last year against Waupaca County and 3 co-workers, saying that he experienced retaliation and intimidation after telling higher-ups about the altered report. A federal judge in the case recently ruled that part of the lawsuit against the current Waupaca County Sheriff Timothy Wills, retired Chief Deputy Carl Arts, and retired Captain Julie Thababin could be thrown out, but ruling that Krager made his comments about the discrepancies to his supervisors as part of his employment and that is not considered to be protected free speech. The defendants are asking the Seventh Circuit Court to throw out the rest of the case, what's known as an interlocutory appeal, based on what they claim is a qualified immunity and that there are no other violations of Krager's constitutional rights.